This is the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel. This is the channel where I talk about podcasts, audio podcasts I've done recently, and I put the links to those podcasts in the description box below and write a little bit of a blog in the description box to let you know what this particular video is about. This video I'm doing in lieu of a podcast, which I'll explain because I'm not in Arizona anymore. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I am and why I am here, and the difference in the both audio kind of environment as well as the sound and the climate. You can see it's pretty windy out there, so it's a little bit different place that I'm in. I'll talk about that as we get into this video a little bit. I feel called to say something about this title of this particular video, which is "We Can't Predict the Future." And I feel called to make that statement now, considering where we are in the month of October. This is middle to end of October. And obviously we all know why I'm kind of making this sort of podcast or video now, because we seem to be obsessed in this country, whether we are talking about YouTube or network television or social media of any kind, really media of any kind, with predicting the future. And I've talked about this a couple of different times in a couple of different ways, but I think it's a good idea to talk about it again. I am very interested in history, as those of you who know me know that I love reading history. We don't get a chance to read a lot of books on the road, generally speaking, because, I don't want to carry a lot of books in this vehicle. They're heavy, and I used to own a lot of books. I gave them all away when I went back out on the road. So one of the things you give up is a large library of books. I thought about traveling with the books, but I'm glad I didn't, because really you don't have room for that. As a nomad, you have room for what is necessary and little else. So the books had to go. It was one of the things that I tried to give to my son, and he didn't want them, and finally I said, okay, they're going to be liberated, and they were. I had several hundred books, almost all history books, and so I love to read history. Now, I've recently discovered Audible. This isn't a commercial for Audible, but I've recently discovered Audible because you can download books and listen to them, and that's almost as good as reading. So I've been listening to a couple of books about the formation of the states and the growth of the West, because I love Western history because I'm out West a lot. And then I just listened to a book about Jim Bridger. Why do I bring this up in this? Why are you saying this? Why are you talking about Jim Bridger in relation to We Can't Predict the Future? And the reason is that in formulating ideas for this video / podcast, I considered going through this whole speech about don't pay attention to social media. You got to be careful with social media and all that. You got to be careful with YouTube. And I decided that's really not what I'm thinking. What I was thinking is my head was really into the pioneering days of the West, including the mountain men like Jim Bridger, who was probably the greatest of all the mountain men, and others who really were the pathfinders of the West. They found the trails. They came out west when they were in their teens and 20s. Jim Bridger was 20. And became mountain men. They became adept at living outdoors and functioning with the Indians, and functioning and finding trails and living way out west. And when the only people there were Native Americans, so there were no quote unquote Euro Americans out west in the 1820s. When Bridger went out west to start beaver hunting. That was his occupation. So I really don't want to do a video about Jim Bridger, but in thinking about those people, especially Bridger, and reading about how he lived, I don't think there was too much effort to predict the future. And the reason I say that is they were too busy surviving. They didn't have time to predict the future or think about the future. Everything was very on the come, so to speak, on a day-to-day basis because survival was preeminent. And Bridger and others who were mountain men just happened to be in the right place at the right time to be able to provide the knowledge and other services that only those guys could provide. And there was only maybe about 20 to 100 of them at the time. So all the way up through the Great Migration and the Oregon Trail of the 1840s, all through the 1850s and 1860s, they were astride this juggernaut of Western development in the United States. Even so, reading another book that was written in 1925, really after the last state, I think was Arizona, that became part of the lower 48, was a book about the whole process of development. It was actually very hard to read. It was written in 1925, so it's really not revisionist in the sense that it was current history in 1925 of what was available for academics to get hold of. All the contracts and the legal and the political and the military spheres related to developing Western states. And when they talked about Western states in the 1800s, they were talking about Illinois and Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia and Virginia and so on. Western Virginia. There was no West Virginia until the Civil War. But again, the thought came to me that these people didn't have time to predict the future. And yet, here we are today. Every day, somebody is making a video that's telling you what's going to happen. Always. The storms are going to do this. The political environment is going to do this. God woke me up in the middle of the night to tell me there's going to be 3 days of darkness, but it's not going to be dark. It's energy. It's an energy thing, and the earth is responding by putting off all of its negative energy, and that's why it's going to be dark. And this is what you have to do when this happens. When this happens, we're going to have a huge sunspot that's going to take everything down, and when that happens, this is what you're supposed to do. We're going to have a civil war. We're going to have a this. We're going to have a that. This person's going to get elected president, and they're going to do this. And nobody knows. The reason we play the game is to find out what the outcome is. And really, the purest environment of not predicting the future, if you're really honest about it, is sports, where you go and you watch the game, and what's entertaining is what actually happens. So it's an important message, especially for now. I don't know what is going to happen in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, next week. And that's where we're going to talk about where I am and why I am where I am. Because no matter what you do, you can't predict the future. And at the end of the day, especially out here as a nomad, you are living very elementary. You are living day by day. And some people have to live day by day. If you have a little bit of a resource, you can sort of plan. But in general, nomads have to live day by day. And if we get stopped down too long, we start projecting, this is what I'm going to do, this is how it's going to go, this is what's going to happen. There's nothing wrong with planning, and there's nothing wrong with being prepared to meet challenges. There's nothing wrong with making a plan, but you have to be prepared for what happens when the plan goes awry, and you've got to improvise because you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, you can look at statistics, and you can say there's a 40% chance of this happening, there's a 20% chance of this happening, and maybe I should have some better financial planning, or I should take a look at getting some deep studies into how to read the financial situation and the markets and everything else. But even people in the markets who are very, educated about what markets do, can't tell you what's going to happen. And I watch a lot of market television, and I watch a lot of market YouTube channels, and it's taken me a long time to figure out which people tell you what's going on without predicting the future. They just say, here's where we're at, this is what could happen, this is another scenario, I don't know why this hasn't happened yet, this is my bias in telling you what I think people need to do or what I think is going to happen. And then you spend a lot of time fact-checking and looking up economic theories and trying to figure out what this guy means by this and that, and that's half the fun of it. You don't know what's going to happen. If you get too sucked into predicting, outcomes can really surprise you, and if you get too sucked into predicting the wrong outcome, the outcome that you're not predicting, can really mess with your head. That's happened to me, and it's one of the reasons I won't participate in the predicting anymore, because, I mean, occasionally I'll do an economic podcast because I'm focused on the price of oil, obviously, because as a nomad, the price of oil / diesel is very important to me, and diesel sometimes converges and diverges from the price of oil. So, there's that too. And I'm focused on commodities because commodities are something that I use. And I'm focused on inflation and deflation because food and things like that are the inflation and deflation that I am exposed to primarily because I'm on the road all the time. So we can't predict the future. I can't say that strongly enough. And I think you have to be careful getting too sucked into YouTube, getting too sucked into whatever it is that you watch, getting too sucked into what appears to be the way that people relate and talk and think these days, which is to tell everybody what they think's going to happen. And they really don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or today. And it's the things that are unpredictable that are going to bite you in the ass 99% of the time. So you have to be prepared for that. These mountain men back in the day and the settlers back in the day and the people that had to learn that there was a different way to approach life in the mountains and in the West than there was out east had to learn some hard lessons in the process. Somebody asked Bridger once, how is it that you have never been scalped? Because there were quite a few people who had been involved in Indian fights and so forth who were scalped and survived. And he had a full head of hair. And he said, because my scalp is firmly attached to my brain. And Bridger was very well respected by the Native Americans, all the tribes. He married a Flathead woman, I believe, and a Shoshone woman, and another woman from another tribe. And he was very well connected to the tribes. He knew 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 Indian languages and 3 or 4 or so other languages, French and Spanish, so that he could function out there very well. So he said, because my scalp is firmly attached to my brain. So it's living by your wits is what I guess I'm trying to say, and he exemplified that. So those people, again, they knew the idea that random things can happen. Weather changes, people change, situations change, and you have to adapt to change. It's hard to predict the change. One of the things that happened to Bridger, again, was that at a certain point, they used to have these rendezvous. And the rendezvous was where the people who staked them, the companies that staked the beaver trappers, would come up to mountain country. So they'd come up to Montana, probably, what became Montana at some point, to bring supplies, coffee, tools, that sort of thing, and trade with the traders, restake the traders, and then the traders would give them their furs to be taken back downriver, and they'd write them a check for whatever their share was of what they thought they could get with it. And they never earned a lot of money. At some point, the beaver trade started to fail, and they had to adjust to that. And these rendezvous, this is the thing that's interesting to me about life. They had these rendezvous from about 1830 or maybe sooner up to 1838 or so. Now the reason they had them is originally they would drag their furs, or they would cache their furs someplace, and the companies that had staked them would come upriver and come up to Montana or wherever, what became Wyoming, Montana country, to get the furs and take them back down to St. Louis. And somehow they made their arrangements. They would meet up and do this individually. And they ended up having this idea that they would start this rendezvous, and then all the trappers would come and all the staking firms would come, and they would kind of, do their thing, and it was a great, usually held over the 4th of July weekend. It was a huge, big get-together of these mountain men and trappers and people that were interested in them, and also Indian tribes who traded as well. So it was a big thing, and it went strong from about 1831-32, and then at about 1836, 37, 38, it started to fade. And I can imagine then those guys thinking, what's wrong, what's going on, what's happening, what's going to happen, and eventually saying, well, this is what we're going to do. Now, Bridger built something called Fort Bridger, which is in modern-day Wyoming, near, I believe, near the Snake River. I could be wrong, but let's just say it's the Snake River. And he had a pretty lucrative business. He built 2 or 3 of these forts until he finally found this main thing, and it was a trading post, a gathering spot for both Indians and the army, and they would, sign treaties there and do all sorts of things, weddings, and he had quite a lucrative business. He could still trade, and he could still get his furs to the people that staked him, if he had any. But now the trade really was guiding people on trails and helping the Indians and helping the Indian agents and helping the army and helping the pioneers as they came through on the Oregon Trail and the new trails that were developed. Also, other pathfinders and explorers came there, surveyors and so on. So he had a nice little business there, which he ended up selling for quite a good sum of money after a big, huge fight with the Mormons, which I don't need to get into in this podcast or video, so to speak. So why do I keep calling this a podcast and a video? And before I get into that, let me just say as a final thought, they had to adapt. They didn't have the tools to predict the future. They had their feelings. They had their knowledge of the business that they were in. They had their knowledge of the wilds, which was the business that they were in. The mountain country of what became the western part of the United States. And they were very good at what they did. And they couldn't predict the future. They couldn't really understand or didn't understand. Nobody wanted beaver skins anymore. They wanted silk. And so the country had changed. People were a little bit more affluent at the time, and they moved on from the beaver, and they wanted other things. So they had to adapt to that, and they did that by building trading posts and other sorts of things, and also by actually functioning as a guide for government explorers, and then they got paid that way. So they had to adjust, and I don't think they could have predicted that. I think they could have felt it, but I don't think they would have watched YouTube to get a prediction on what was going to happen with the beaver trade. As with everything else in life, if you focus on the now and you focus on what you have to do right now, then you're not that concerned with predicting the future. And you don't get yourself into a situation where you're obsessively checking your phone constantly to find out what happened with Israel or what happened with the stock market, unless you're invested in the stock market. That's one excuse when you can do it. Or what happened with this situation, or what's going to happen with the election. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and especially now, it cannot be predicted. And I am very amused by all of the so-called experts on YouTube who think they know what's going to happen, and they just don't. And so I just wanted to say that. I think I felt called to say, hey man, we can't predict the future. It's just something that we need to understand, that things are going to happen. And as I believe, I'm not saying we can't do anything about it, but I am saying we're on a path. Generally speaking, we're going to head down that path one way or the other, on one side of the path or the other, but we're going in a particular direction in this world, and it's exciting to be alive now because we get to see which way and where and how things play out. To wit, about 4 days ago, I was happily ensconced in my campground in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, a location we will not reveal, where we went to escape the bizarre activities at Quartzsite, and my computer failed, of all the things. Now, I use my computer a lot. I use it to do all my podcasts, all my editing. Don't need it for phones, don't need it to do YouTube, but I need it for lots of other things. I need it for checking in with my bank accounts. I need it for checking in with other types of people. I need it for blogging. and I need it for, obviously the audio podcasts, because I record audio and then I transfer it to the computer, and then I edit on the computer and blog it up in the whole 9 yards. Well, that's impossible because the thing has died. I had to leave yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yesterday was a long day. Yeah, it was yesterday. I had to leave. And I started up to Parker, Arizona, because I was going to try to get my computer fixed in Parker. Well, the place that fixes computers in Parker was closed. Went up to Havasu City, and went to the same place. They have a location up there, and well, they were closed, and that is both a mail facility and it's also a computer IT facility. And the guy that was running the mail business said, well, I don't do any computer stuff. I'm the mail guy. My advice is to go up to Las Vegas, because I was going to go to Scottsdale. And I looked at the map and I realized that from Havasu City, Vegas is a lot easier to get to, and that's where I am. I am currently in a truck stop on the outskirts of Las Vegas. I just bought a new MacBook Pro that set me back quite a lot of money, but you got to do what you got to do. Didn't expect to have that expense of all expenses. And I haven't set it up yet. There's a couple things I got to do, and I've been going back and forth. Well, the first thing was data recovery, which I could talk to you all day about, but I'm not going to. So I stuck around. I stayed in truck stop last night, and then this morning, after getting a good night's sleep, I went back to Las Vegas to the Apple Store to get a recommendation on data recovery. I got into that a little bit, and then came back up to another truck stop, because this is not a good day for driving. You can kind of see it, and I used my big mic so you can really kind of hear it if you look. It's going to be a little hard to turn this without making a big, huge fight, but you can see through the window. I don't dare go out there and record because it's too windy, but you can see how windy it is, and I'm here at the truck stop. I love truck stops, but I did not expect to be in the Las Vegas area, or even be in the city of Las Vegas at this time when I started camping. So now I'm kind of feeling the urge to travel more. I might go over to Joshua Tree. I might go over to Fullerton, California, see if I can get some data recovery help. In the meantime, kind of getting my computer set up and doing some audio podcasts and using the new computer. And life is good. I was enjoying just not going anywhere and not spending any money, but guess what? That's over. So you don't know what's going to happen, and you can't predict the future. You just have to be prepared to roll with the punches. And that is all. So you can check the description box. I'll link to the podcasts. I don't think I'll do a podcast on this, because I already have. This is it. So this is a little bit longer, because this is the podcast of You Can't Predict the Future. And YouTube certainly can't predict the future, and all of the social media in the world can't predict the future for most people. We have to live it, and we have to try to stay awake, and we have to try to stay on top of what we're doing. And what really the question is, what am I going to do? What am I going to do if such and such happens? Or am I prepared for this, or am I prepared for that? Now, I was prepared for this, but there was a little bit of work with cards to use, because the other card is in the process of being sent, so it hit at just the worst time. So that's it. That's what I am doing. I'll let you know where I'm going to go, but I'll probably go over to California for a little while, and maybe to LA. I don't know yet. We'll see. But I kind of got the travel bug. Thanks for watching. I'm going to go back and check out the wind and make myself a cup of coffee and put this podcast up /video. Bye-bye.